filled with a bunch of violent people. And if you're just some nonviolent cannabis person and you're in this environment, it's super traumatic for you. And the last thing you're going to do is do something to get yourself back into that environment. You're just trying to make a living trading a little cannabis, most likely, and you happen to be black and brown or poor and white, and you can't get a good lawyer. Somebody rolled on you and you just don't have a chance.
Yeah, and in those same states now, there's legal businesses owned by very wealthy, well-connected people doing the exact same thing. And as you were talking about with your brother when he first realized it, I think it slowly started to dawn on all of us as we were like, oh, I can get cannabis delivered to my door now. Like some guy pulls up with, what looks like a pizza box, and I get to pick my weed out of it. And after the novelty of that wore off and I started to really get into discussion with people, I kind of, it sounds horrible, but I kind of remembered that there were people who have been going down for what was considered a crime and is now one of the most lucrative businesses in the US. And I feel like because it didn't directly impact me, I didn't think about it. But as soon as organizations like your organization and other dispensaries that I was going to in California started pointing to things like you guys did, the cash for prisoners, and I wrote some letters for a free gram with you guys.
Cool.
And there was like a big binder full of them,
Yeah.
and I just sit there and read them all. And it really helped me kind of connect in my mind that I was taking part in this cool new industry, and suddenly I had all this freedom, but I was not. That was not the story for everybody. Not everybody got freedom when we all got to buy legal weed, and I think that projects like this and like the rollover, the change at the register, it just really helps to kind of remind us, even though it doesn't directly impact us, we cannot turn a blind eye to this injustice anymore. It's getting cold outside, which is the perfect time to snuggle up with some good bud and your favorite magazine. So head over to differentleaf.com and treat yourself or a loved one to 4 issues of our gorgeous magazine for $20. In our upcoming fall issue, you can also read my latest article all about the work of the Last Prisoner Project. I want to know a couple of the stories of the prisoners that you've helped. I was actually reading up on a couple in particular that really interested me. I'm a wife of a veteran, so this one really caught my heartstrings. Justin Graham was a veteran who had PTSD and had a medical marijuana card and was found in his home state of Michigan with a pipe and was then imprisoned for 75 days, and it's still on his record, and now he's not able to get medical marijuana card because he has that imprisonment on his record.
Yeah.
It's these kinds of people that you're trying to help, these kinds of stories. These are not the stories that fearmongers are trying to make out of really terrifying drug dealers in your city, or like coming into your towns. Like, it's people like this who have this little record on their backs and they just can't get rid of it. How do you connect with people that have these kinds of stories?
Well, we learn about our constituents in a variety of different ways. It's mainly the community lets us know, and the families of people that are locked up hear about us and let us know. Our estimates, and we're actually working with a group to try to measure this better because it's very hard to measure. But our estimates are there are 40,000 people in the United States alone for cannabis in prisons. So it's impossible for Last Prisoner Project to have all of those folks as our constituents right out of the gate. We want all of them to be our constituents, of course, but we do have to make some hard decisions. So we have about a few dozen people that are locked up for weed in the United States. And they're some of our top priorities, those cases. I'll tell you about Richard DeLisi, who's the longest serving cannabis prisoner in the United States right now, 36 years. He started serving his sentence when I started first smoking weed when I was 15, 37 years ago.
Was it possession or
No, he was definitely he was trafficking, but even in his case, which was a large amount of cannabis, it's not as large as, what Canopy Growth Corporation is growing, or what Kronos is doing, or what, even a vertically integrated company like Candescent here in California. So when you look at what a guy like Richard did compared to what these companies are doing now, the companies are actually doing a much bigger volume than even Richard did. So all these things have to be taken into context, right? And this is a guy who's nonviolent offender, and he's got kids, he's got families, he's got grandchildren he's never seen. He's got all kinds of folks that have had to visit him for 30 plus years at a prison, for doing something that ultimately is medicinal for all of us. We all have an endocannabinoid system. So what Richard was doing really in the 1970s and 80s was a really heroic thing. Those of us that were traders and smugglers and growers, we were actually doing something very heroic when you think about what was going on with prohibition in those days. So he needs to come out. So he's one example. Michael Thompson's another lifer. He's up in Michigan. We actually have a clemency petition on the governor's desk for him. So he might get out any minute. Richard might get out on compassionate release again for COVID. So we're working on Richard. And you mentioned, there's people that have less intense profiles and cases. And, one comes to mind. There was a young man who lives in Kansas City, and part of Kansas City is in Missouri, and part of Kansas City is in Kansas. And Missouri's got medical, and Kansas has got prohibition. Well, he's a patient who happens to live on the Kansas side, and he was he was visiting someone on the Kansas side. I guess he lives on the Missouri side, and he was visiting his mother or somebody close to him on the Kansas side. He had his medicine with him. Got busted. And, this terrible legal case, he's looking at years in prison. And it's just, and he was just in the part of Kansas City that's in Kansas, not Missouri. And it's just absurd.
So what do you guys try to do on the policy level? Because I know that's one of the things that you're working towards on top of the releasing, the expungement, the support. You also work towards a lot of policy change, and that is like really hitting the root of the problem, because this started with the war on drugs, and it's got to end by the dismantling of that policy.
Well, I'm pleased you asked about that, because we're launching a 501c4. For those of you that don't know about nonprofit status, the 501c3s are to help people, feed the homeless, so forth and so on. 501c4s are policy-driven, policies to advocate for the homeless rather than actually feed them. So one mechanism, the 3, is more operational, and then the other mechanism, the 4, is more policy driven. And the law says that 3s can only do so much policy work. And so we have to do a lot of policy work because the policies are screwed up just about everywhere. So we're starting a 501c4. We've submitted all the paperwork. We're just waiting for that to happen. What we're trying to do, and we haven't been able to get it done, we're working with lots of other groups. And this is all legal work. This is all attorneys. Sometimes political activists. This does not happen with a petition process or a ballot initiative process. This happens, usually behind closed doors with lawyers and prosecutors and parole boards, and sometimes state legislatures have to pass a law. So what we want to get done is when some place legalizes weed, that automatically retroactive, it's called retroactive justice or retroactive expungement. Everybody gets out of jail like the next day, or everybody gets their record expunged like the next day. And the burden is on the government to do all the work and to contact you and to let you know that you've been expunged not for you to have to hire a lawyer and spend thousands of dollars getting your record expunged. Should have never been a record in the first place. So we haven't been able to get that done. I don't know if we'll ever be able to get that done, because then you're talking about politicians having to vote on something that's pretty progressive. And when they go up for election, there's other politicians that might accuse them of being soft on crime. So it's hard to get that done. But we do try to get that done, because that's the right thing to get done. In the absence of that getting done, we have to go through a whole slog process. It depends on the state, depends on the municipality in some cases, done on a local level.
And so how many states are you working in right now for policy stuff?
We're working on the states that have legalization and the best frameworks for this work within those legalization laws. So Colorado's got a pretty good one. Nevada just did a whole bunch of people that we worked on that one. California, it's got some good stuff on paper, terrible on executions. California's like this. It's like a monster. But Washington State, Ohio, Illinois has a governor that's very friendly to this. So we're doing some work in Illinois. So mainly policy is still low-hanging fruit. So, we're not in Texas. We're not in Mississippi. Louisiana, we're trying to get some people out of jail just because it's such a terrible system there. We've got a few lifers down there we're trying to help. But, generally, if a state is so bad and has no medical or adult use cannabis laws or really restrictive ones, we don't have enough resources to fight those battles yet. We've got people that we can actually help. It's not easy making those decisions, of course, but we have to make them.
Sounds like you're pretty soon going to be in all 50 states, though. We just had an election where Mississippi legalized forms of medical marijuana. I'm kind of blown away by it. South Dakota went from having nothing legal to having everything legal. So, I see progression. It is coming, and programs like the Last Prisoner Project, it's going to be integral to criminal justice reform as we do this. So I'm excited to see what you guys do on the state and the national level. It's great to see this kind of work.
I think we're going to grow massively fast, just managing all that growth. I think great problem to have, and I look forward to it, but it is sometimes a challenge. But I agree with you. I think that social justice is going to be a big, big theme in this country for the next 10 years. And those folks that don't get with the program are basically going to be left behind.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
And now for your latest US cannabis news. The voters have spoken, and if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that we all just want to toke up after a long, hard day. We've now got medical marijuana in Mississippi and South Dakota. Adult use cannabis is legal in South Dakota, Arizona, Montana, and New Jersey. Shout out to our producer Andrea, who can now legally partake. And Oregon has decriminalized all illicit drugs, which is obviously huge. Of course, those laws will all take some time to write, finalize, and implement, so don't expect a pot shop on your street corner anytime soon. As New Englanders can tell you, it might even take a few years, so you'll just have to keep supporting your local cannabis entrepreneur until then. In Jersey, voters also opted to reduce the crime of magic mushroom possession from an offense that could get you 3 to 5 years in prison to an offense that costs you a $500 fine. As per usual, the states seem to be doing most of the work when it comes to decriminalization, legalization, and expunging records. While President-elect Joe Biden said on the campaign trail that cannabis decriminalization and expungements would be a major part of his racial justice agenda, his plan, released over the weekend, had no specific mentions of marijuana policy reform. A few of Biden's likely advisors, like Andrew Yang, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders, have all expressed hope this week that a Biden administration will eventually budge on cannabis at the federal level.